Prof-It is brought to you by StopToShop.com, your ultimate source for Pokemon singles, tins, boxes, and cards from a variety of other games too. Type in the coupon code PROFIT in caps with a dash, and you'll sweeten the deal with a 10% discount on your full order. If you're looking for cards, make the stop at Stop to Shop.
So ever since they released Platinum, and they introduced the Lost Zone concept, and they had like 3, maybe 4 Pokemon that had anything to do with the Lost Zone, and it never really mattered that a Pokemon was in the Lost Zone. Me and my cousins used to have a joke about the Pokemon trading card game. Went a little something like this. You want to hear a joke? The Lost Zone! It's not really that funny anymore.
Hey everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Prof-It. Originally, I was going to talk about Call of Legends, but there really isn't too much to say about the set. The set has good artwork, the ratio on Holo Energy and Shiny Pokemon is really low, the reprints are pretty bad, and Lost World is out. Out of all those facts, I think the last one is the one that will make a definitive impact on our metagame. Gengar Prime has been more hyped and more debunked than any card in recent history. Gengar's price went from around $15 each to nearly $45 almost overnight, making a full playset of Gengar Primes one of the most expensive single attackers of all time. Do I think it's worth over $160? Probably not, but I do believe that the deck is good. So, why'd I say good instead of great or amazing? Gengar Prime has a huge hurdle to jump when it comes to our upcoming state championships, because every player is going to be expecting and teching against you. In this episode, I'm going to go over your best techs, engines, and ways to deal with your bad matchups when it comes to using Lost World. Here's a brief overview of how Lost World works. It's a stadium card that, when in play, creates an alternate win condition. If, during your turn, before you attack, your opponent has 6 Pokemon in the Lost Zone, then you can declare yourself the winner. Having an entirely new win condition is something that Pokemon has never done in its 12 years of play, so it's a very interesting addition. There are about 4 Pokemon that can realistically get your opponent's Pokemon into the Lost Zone fast enough to get 6 by the end of your game. But Gengar Prime is by far the most sought after, and in my opinion, the only truly competitive way to win using Lost World. Let's take a look at him. Gengar's Hurl into Darkness lets you look at your opponent's hand and throw as many Pokemon as you have Psychic Energy attached to you into the Lost Zone. You also have a fallback strategy in his Pokebody Catastrophe, which puts Pokemon into the Lost Zone that are knocked out while Gengar Prime is active. His 2 energy attack, Cursed Droplets, lets you place 4 damage counters however you like, which could help push for a last Pokemon or 2 into the Lost Zone near the end of the game. The goal of Gengar is to be getting on average 1 Pokemon into the Lost Zone per turn, allowing you to win in 6 turns and possibly earlier. Of the many support Pokemon that could help Gengar Prime get those 6 Pokemon into the Lost World, I don't really recommend many. I talked about Mime Jr. in my card of the day, and I think he's just alright, but not nearly worth including in Gengar Prime. Absol GX is another choice I don't really recommend. You can put up to 3 of your opponent's top cards from their deck into the Lost Zone based on coin flips, but it requires setup, heads on flips, and knowledge of what your opponent's going to draw. Palkia GX is probably the most feasible choice for a partner. His Lost Cyclone Pokepower could force your opponent to put 2 Pokemon into the Lost Zone immediately, if they have a 5 Pokemon bench. The problem with Palkia is that when he's active, it's a chore to get him out of the way. Because of this, I suggest just using Palkia as a closer to win the game at the very end. I did test Palkia in my build for a while, and unfortunately, was never able to use him to win a single game, so keep that in consideration before just throwing him right in. Long story short, your main focus is going to have to be around Gengar Prime in order to win fast enough. So, what are some tricks to guarantee that you'll be able to get Pokemon into the Lost Zone every turn? There are 2 main cards that ensure you keep throwing Pokemon into the Lost Zone, and those are Seeker and Spiritomb from Triumphant. Seeker forces both players to pick up a Pokemon on their bench. When you force your opponent to pick up a Pokemon, that's a guaranteed Pokemon to throw into the Lost Zone from their hand, while also allowing you to reuse your own Pokemon powers like Uxie or Mesprit. On the turns when you can't play Seeker, and know that your opponent probably doesn't have any Pokemon in their hand, Spiritomb from Triumphant is the way to go. He allows you to force your opponent to shuffle their hand and draw a hand of 6 cards. By forcing your opponent to draw all those cards, chances are fairly high that they'll hit a Pokemon for you to throw into the Lost Zone. Aside from traditional deck staples like Uxie and Pokemon Collector, there's one more staple card in Lost World decks, and that card is Twins. Twins lets you grab 2 cards of your choice from your deck, but only when you're down in prizes. Luckily for Lostgar, because your deck has no real way of taking prizes, you'll be able to use Twins almost the entire game to help set up and continue a stream of Gengars. So aside from the traditional Gengar Prime line and staples, what's the best way to run the deck? The best way I found is running a turbo engine, involving Pokedrawer Plus and plenty of Search Trainers. This allows you to set up Gengar fast enough to compete with about 80% of popular decks. So what about the other 20%? Well, here's the many problems that you can run into with a Lost World deck and how to counter them. The first big problem is that when you run a turbo engine to beat fast decks with a lot of trainers, you'll struggle tremendously against Vilegar, which will cause your fast trainer cards to become useless. 2 big ways to try and deal with this are Regice and Mew. Regice's Regi move will allow you to get Spiritomb out of the way and set up your first few Gengars, and it can also help you dump trainers out of your hand to make Poltergeist weaker. Mew, on the other hand, can help you set up a Gengar in 2 ways, either normally or through Mew himself. I did a card of the day on Mew as well, so check it out here to see how it works with Gengar. He might not be needed in every build, but against Vilegar he's a great choice, and I'm pretty fond of him. Your second problem is going to be the Dark attackers that do 70 or more damage at one time. At a ×2 weakness to Dark, Pokemon like Tyranitar Prime, Honchkrow SV, and Absol GX will all knock you out in one hit, and eventually win the game before you can. There are once again 2 options to deal with this: Azelf level X and Exploud. Azelf level X's body makes all Psychic Pokemon have 0 weakness, and Exploud gives all Pokemon no weakness, so they both accomplish the same thing. Azelf, being a level X, requires you to be active to level up. This can be tricky to do without getting knocked out first, and requires you to use an Energy, Unknown Q, or a Switch card to get it to the bench. Exploud is also pretty difficult because he's a Stage 2, and it'll be a little tough to set up. Because both of these Pokemon aren't ideal, Dark attackers are definitely one of Gengar Prime's biggest problems. The third problem is Dialga G, one of your hardest matchups of all. Dialga's Deafen attack can prevent you from being able to drop your Lost World Stadium, which could essentially force you to lose the game in the long term. Your basic strategy against this is to put 6 Pokemon into the Lost World, and then do your best to buy yourself the 1 turn needed to lay Lost World down. Your best bet of doing this is running a Machamp tech, and maybe a Rainbow Energy or a Fighting Energy to fuel his attack. By bringing out Machamp and using Takeout, eventually your opponent will have to break the Deafen Lock to knock out Machamp, or you'll just win by taking all your prizes. It's not a pretty solution, and it might take too much time to actually finish your match this way, but it's probably your only answer to Deafen Lock without losing right away. And speaking of time, time itself is one of your biggest problems. In Swiss, you automatically lose any game that ends in time because you aren't taking prizes, and Top Cut can get pretty complicated. Top Cut rules have changed back to their old ways. In Game 2 or later, in Best 2 out of 3, you have to take 4 prizes in order to get your game to count. While this rule definitely does help out Gengar Prime, and your opponent will have to be racing to take those 4 prizes now, you'll also struggle in trying to win before time is up, or you'll have to go to sudden death. In sudden death, you can't take quick prizes unless you run an attack that's intended to. In this scenario, an early takeout with Machamp is probably your only way to take that first quick prize. So the deck is solid, disruptive, and very hyped. Gengar Prime will have to overcome the many tactics geared toward beating it in order to do well this state season, and you'll definitely need a very good list for your metagame. Few players claim to have a list that can tackle all your problems realistically, and it'll be a definite challenge to see which players can take Gengar Prime to the top.
So that's it for today's episode. States starts March 12th, and there's another one on March 19th here in the US. So if you're looking to test a new deck, now's probably the time to do it. Good luck putting together a Gengar Prime build. Even if you don't intend on taking it to States, it'd probably be a good idea to test against it, because it's definitely going to be played. Thanks for watching today's episode of Prof-It, and have a great weekend. Peace!